All right, so we're live. Alex, welcome. This is Digital Crafters. I usually interview people who create like digital products or projects with their computers. So I'm very, very excited to have you here. But before we start the interview, could you introduce yourself a little bit? Maybe talk about your background and what you're currently working on.
Yeah, so I'm Alexander Obenauer. I primarily my core work is exploring the future of personal computing. I'm sure we'll get into it, but the current instantiation of that is in experiments on what the future of the operating system looks like. And I do a few other things. I advise folks who are building products and tools in this space, and I build some small commercial products as well on the side.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, I noticed that you created some time ago like a mail client.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, that's how my career got started.
Cool. Yeah, I've tried to download that, but I think it's like still like closed
Yeah. Right now,
invitation.
I'll send you an invite. If you remind me after, I'll send you an invite.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Yeah, because I think that's definitely there's a lot of room for improvement in email,
Yeah,
especially
email
nowadays.
is one of those funny things that I think really shows where um, the software that we design and use today doesn't think the way that we think of the things we're trying to interact with, like email.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that's a really good spot for that kind of thinking.
Yeah, definitely. Um, well, I want to ask you a few questions about your current project. So, WonderOS. I know that you were working on a landing page for it. But yeah, I have quite a few questions. So, the first question would be: are you planning to build this operating system like completely from scratch?
Mm. Yeah, that's an interesting question. So WonderOS, and right now it has a splash page, but there will be more information soon at wonderos.org. So it is a research project made of a handful of different experiments, and each experiment um, seeks really to ask a question or a series of questions, and hopefully move us closer to finding more possible answers to those questions. So one of the instantiations that some of those experiments take is in the form of an operating system. The from scratch question, of course, there's a you know at some point you have to stop going down the stack, or maybe you don't. There's some bottom of the stack, and so the furthest from scratch that it's been to date is as a Linux distribution, where it provides its own user environment rather than a traditional desktop workspace. That's as far down the stack as it's gone so far. I would love to, in future phases, get into playing with hardware and exploring further down the stack. So yeah.
Yeah, so basically, like the lowest point you would plan to go is basically Linux. Maybe WonderOS could be like a not a distro, but like like a fork or like a like created based on Linux.
Yeah. Basically, that's as far from scratch as it's been so far.
Got
Yeah,
it. Oh,
yeah,
cool. Yeah. When you tweeted about you working on your prototype, and I asked you if you were like building an app on top of macOS, and you mentioned also that you were working on like your renderer, your like layout language, and a few other things. So, if you could tell us like a little bit more about that. I don't know if it's like I don't know how open you want to be about like your work. I don't know if you're planning to make it open source or not. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No worries. Yeah. So I've been tinkering with so WonderOS. One of the kind of core experiments that kind of runs through the whole project is that it's an itemized operating system. So it looks at everything as an item. The idea is that in your personal computing domain, we have tons of items, from emails, web pages, to podcast episodes, tasks, calendar events, etc. And so there, everything is an item, and every item has a type, and items are rendered by item views, and your item views are designed for to render a specific type to allow the user to interact with them, and you can collect your items at will into items of different types from different sources into a single workspace, and use them together. You can reference items from each other regardless of type or source, and there's kind of this freeing notion of the itemized OS, and it can act like a graph, and so there's a lot of different things there. But one of the core, means of interacting with your items is through item views. And so, so I think what you're referencing is I had put together, I was tinkering with building an interpreted language. So I made a programming language for WonderOS called Wonderful. My wife named it. And I love that name. It stuck quickly. So Wonderful is a declarative language. You can dip into imperative statements within certain parts of it, but it's a declarative language that lets you lay out an item view for items of a certain type, or system views. You can item views are items themselves, and you can open them in an item view, and in the system, the item view for an item view is an item view editor. And so you can edit item views and system views within the system, and modify them regardless of where the view came from. It's on your system now. You can edit it, and so you can declare your item view within the Wonderful language, and you can declare actions and queries to pull data out of the big item drive that stores all of your items, to query specific pieces of data to populate into your view, and then actions are kind of the same. You push new facts off to the item drive, so the language is really cool. It was the first time when I was in college. I did a course completely in assembly, and then I transferred schools, and then at my new school, the next course I did was often higher level languages. So there was like this. I don't know if each curriculum had it at a different point, but I definitely missed the build your own interpreter phase. So that was a new thing for me, and it was a really interesting and fun process. I really enjoyed going through it. I went through it with the Crafting Interpreters book, which was a lovely, lovely book, very well written. And so that language has been an interesting piece of some of the experiments, and being able to edit the the item views from within the system is really weird and interesting. And then, since the system owns the language and the interpreter, I can do very specific things with it to get some things just right. So, for example, when you're building an item view, you don't need to. One of the goals is moving to higher level primitives. So, for example, you don't want to be managing focus states. It should at this point be a lower level primitive that the system takes care of. And so in the language, I can write the language such that focus states can become a much easier, more declarative thing, which has been really nice. So that language was one experiment that has permeated into a couple of the other experiments, which has been really nice. And then I'm curious too about then taking it. So the idea is, in an interpreter, we're taking that language and we're turning it into an abstract syntax tree. And so, are there other ways to modify that abstract syntax tree besides just writing straight, code in a text file? What can that look like? And can those become more user end things?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, basically, this prototype that you're building, this language, you would be like imagining like you have WonderOS already there. You download and install some items, and then it comes with some predefined item views. But let's say that you want to interact with those items in a different way. So within the system, you could either by coding or by using like an interface of some kind, use this declarative language to interact with that item.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So a really, really simple example is almost too simple. It can be a very powerful concept, but a very simple and straightforward example is um, when when people, for example, like if you're on Dribble and you look at designs for email clients, something that people very, very commonly do is they make the sender name small and the subject big. And that makes sense if you are designing with mock-up data where every email is probably important. Because if you were to scan through an important list of emails, you already know you want to read each one, so you're going to look at the subject as a primary piece. In reality, as you know, the signal to noise ratio in the inbox is brutal. You're not going to read the subject line of many of the emails you receive. So the first thing you're scanning for is the sender name. And based on the sender name, you're going to decide whether or not you're even going to read the subject line. Um, so, for example, if for whatever silly reason the system came with, or you had installed an item view where email message headers previews are shown with the the sender name small and the subject big, and you realize this is like really messing with my flow. Like the first thing I'm scanning for is the sender name. That I need that to be bold. I need to be able to scan for that. You could just pop open the item view, switch the font sizes on the two if you wanted to, save it, and you're done. And now the your message list looks the way you want it to look, so that it supports your specific needs and the way you're trying to use your email. So that's a very simple example.
Nice. Yeah, that would be really amazing. Like, I think that, for example, one of the things that I like about using Linux, I mean, I mainly use Mac OS for work, and because it's like the default good option. But what I really like about Linux is that you can, in theory, customize everything based on your needs, right?
Uh-huh.
But like the process of doing that is just insane. Like, you're gonna spend a ton of
Sure.
time, and then there's updates, and well, there's just like a ton of stuff that you need to do to
Yeah,
update
back
things.
in the day, so like mid 2000s, when I think I got my first Mac maybe in 2004. Back then, something really weird and cool that happened to exist was since all applications, not all, many applications interfaces were built in Interface Builder, which at the time was a separate application entirely, and they would be saved. Interface Builder files were .nib files, and they were like uncompiled files saved within an application bundle. So back then, like 2005, you could pop open an application bundle of a Mac app, and if the interface was defined using an interface builder file, you could literally pop it open, quit the app, pop open its interface builder file, adjust the interface in interface builder with no code, like to however you wanted, and then save, close, and open the application again. And it would work fine till the next time you updated the app. But I always thought that was such a funny thing that we happen to have for a period of time, somewhat recently, and we don't obviously don't have anymore.
One thing that comes to mind with allowing users to modify like the item views is how, like, let's say it's a very complex program, or like a very complex set of views. Because I mean, I imagine that it's going to be more like you have different item views like bundled together into like some major view thing, if that makes sense. And so how do you prevent developers from creating a mess that's hard to customize, even though it's possible?
Yeah. So whenever there is an item, a view with many item views within it, each item view is its own separate thing. So that cuts down on the
Okay.
complexity right there. That said, right now I haven't. The experiment hasn't gotten unwieldy enough yet, right? So I'm the only person on the system. I'm the only person using the system. So I haven't even gotten close to finding out how messy can this, how bad can this, how complex can this get.
Yeah.
So I'll be curious at some point to see um, when I start scratching the surface of um, those views getting too complex to really handle, what that looks like, and what it might look like to try to make that better. Right now, by them each being their own individual components is very helpful. So an item a view that has many items within it doesn't need to worry about defining the views of the items in it.
Yeah.
It can set a preference towards a specific item view if you have multiple item views installed for a given item. But in general, each item view, each item is rendered by its own item view, even within a larger view.
Cool. That's really. I mean, I'm like, I really want this operating system so bad because it's
Yeah,
just like,
I've wanted it for years.
yeah,
So getting to take the time to build it has been really therapeutic.
I can imagine. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
like amazing. Um, yeah, I wonder how complicated it could get with that. Yeah, because I mean, like I'm like comparing it to front end development right now, and like how
Mm-hmm.
things are, and I mean it's very different because there's like uh, things like features built on top of other features that may have not worked well in the past.
Yeah.
Um, so, for example, container queries, which is something that's like, it could happen eventually with all major browsers. Like I would see that like as a very crucial part of item views, given that you can insert them anywhere. And now that I say this out loud, I'm one other thing that I was wondering about is, are you planning to have windows, or is it going to be more like an open canvas where you can group things together, like like Figma? Like, would you be able to like group something and like move it around the canvas, or how do you visualize it?
Yeah. So in the system as it stands today, the so workspaces are items themselves that are rendered by item views and have a reference constituent items. So a workspace, you could build an item view for workspaces that basically has windows. Like you
Oh,
could
nice.
build an item view for workspaces that acts a lot like Figma, where you can group things, move together, that kind of thing. You could build item views to kind of instantiate any in the system today two-dimensional, cursor, touch-based sort of, or keyboard, um, um, you know, workspace layout method, if you will. So right now, the way I have the system, the item view for workspaces that runs in the system by default is a browsing path, and that is panes of your open items in one horizontally scrolling path, and that's been a really nice, for me. That's been a really nice way to visualize workspaces. I can populate it with a heterogeneous collection of items, an email, a web page, a task list, whatever, and I can just kind of scroll along through those things. And they remember that they were in workspaces together. So if I have one open in a different workspace later, it's easy to immediately pull up some of the things that it was in a workspace with before. And workspaces themselves are non-volatile. So you can go to your recent workspaces and see all the workspaces that you've had open recently, and just pop one open again, and you're back in that in that project, in that train of thought. So I found the browsing path to be a really cool way to kind of reify your train of thought on screen without having to sit there and manage window sizes and all that. You can change the width of each pane, and that's it. Each one is full height. It's a really nice way to just kind of quickly move through a piece of work, a project, a thought. I mean, if you think about like just scheduling a meeting, you might be on Twitter or an email, and then you're creating a calendar event. You might be creating a note, setting up a meeting link, and so so you've already got four completely different, on a Windows based desktop environment. You're talking about four different apps. But so in a browsing path, you've got these four items that are now collected in this one browsing path, and that's a really nice way to look at it. It's really easy to pull that browsing path back up, and them kind of remembering that they're all associated with each other is pretty nice. But something that I really like about the fact that workspaces are themselves items, anyone could build a new kind of item view to behave the way they would want it to build. Even if they wanted it to be like Windows, they could make windows for each thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it'd be the thinking is you democratize how each component of the system works, and you make it so that the whole thing can be evolved in piecemeal by the community at large, without one core company having to adopt and compile ideas into one giant executable. And being able to modify the item view for workspaces gives people that kind of flexibility and freedom. You get to find out what the community's best thinking is. That's kind of one of the core thoughts of the system.
Damn, yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I'm really excited about seeing this feature.
Yeah, there are some demos in my lab notes on my site now from an earlier version of this system that I was building a while back. But I'll have demos of the new the system as it stands today. First half of this summer, those will go online.
Nice, awesome.
Yeah.
Really excited to see those. So, and what about theming or like styling? Like, let's say, because you can customize the views, but if you customize a view to be, I don't know, like to have like a yellow background color, but let's say that the default is like gray, and you want all of them to follow like the same pattern. How would you achieve that?
Yeah, so right now, theming in the system is pretty minimal, which is sad because I have great respect for theming, and I used to love Mac themes back in the day. The site Mac themes was I would live on it in high school, and theming your Mac was a lot of fun. So the theming is pretty minimal in the system now. Basically, it works very similar to how CSS variables work. So in your item views in the wonderful language, you can use variables to represent specific font size, colors, that kind of thing, and then you can set. The system has its own global variables in this base kit that it loads up right at launch, and you can just, since everything is an item, you can just put in your own overwrite that item's global variables with your own, which effectively means that you can change the typefaces or colors or whatnot going on. But it is fairly minimal. I think at some later stage when I get to some really good, having fun with some of those layers, it would be good to get some good theming support in there.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, and just like the fact that you have access to like the layout and basically everything in terms of like the UI, I think it's just gonna be easier in general. Like, I don't think there's gonna be like a major problem with theming. Like, if you want to like go really into the details, I don't see it as being something harder to implement later on. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So, and when it comes to the low level implementation, so getting back to that Linux part of the talk, would you change something about, like, I mean, I that you would definitely not rely on window managers, and but I'm guessing that the lowest you would go is like on the compositor. So I don't know if you're familiar with like how a desktop environment is
divided.
Not. Okay, yeah. So
yeah, I mean, I'm not the one that mine uses. It just wholesale replaces the whole thing. So I don't know how they traditionally work.
I'm definitely not an expert. Okay, but what I understand is that you basically have multiple modules, and on the bottom you have a compositor. So that's what the compositor talks to your hardware basically, and like if you have like a graphics card or something or not, like it's gonna use whatever there's available to render the pixels on the screen. And you basically, my understanding is that you basically, if you're a window manager or like some desktop environment, you basically want to ask the compositor for real estate in your screen. So I'm guessing that that's the lowest you would need to go. Like, okay, I'll see how and when I draw my pixels. Just Just
Uh-huh.
give me space for it.
Yeah.
So based on that, yeah, what I wanted to ask you is like, if you have any specific ideas, uh, like in terms of low level of how it would look like to implement the item views. But based on what you already said, I have some like rough idea of how it would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so far I wish I did. So far, currently it just to make development faster, it currently interprets into GTK. So it kind of it leans on a lot of existing code in the standard Linux stack because I don't know nearly enough about it yet. So I'm not sure what it would look like to go further lower level. I was checking out. I think it's called Cairo, the rendering engine that GTK is based on. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah. So I was checking it out because I was trying to figure out what it would look like to build on, you know, down to at least that level and using it. But ultimately, just to get it started,
yeah,
especially since
definitely.
I'm building two separate renderers, one on Mac and one on Linux.
Yeah,
Yeah, I didn't go that far low level yet.
yeah, yeah. No, that makes it enough sense. I think
Yeah.
that starting high and then going low is definitely the way to go, because otherwise you get into a lot of messy things, I guess.
Yeah, I found that on some of the experiments I've wanted to go lower level, and on some of them I've gone a little bit too low, where progress is so slow that I can't experiment with the
Yeah,
new thinking, the higher level idea, the kind of whatever the higher level experiment is. I can't progress it fast enough. And the key to an experiment's or a series of experiments success is experimenting quickly. And so often I've had to kind of tap the brakes a little bit to make sure that I'm progressing each individual experiment quickly enough. But
yeah,
but over time too, I've been slowly kind of you know etching into some of those harder to reach places, and like the program, like having its own language for views, and for, well, it's for renderers overall, but views when you're on a when you have a screen. It can make progress very slow when I'm doing an experiment that uses it, just because I have to keep expanding it and making sure that everything is correct. And you're working on multiple levels all at once. It's akin to, I think I wrote this on. It's akin to to designing a web page, to building its HTML and CSS, and building the browser engine all at the same time, and designing HTML and CSS, the languages, all at once. And so progress can be really, really slow. And so I make sure to um, only lean on the kind of that full stack when I know what the experiment should look like first. So if I don't yet know what the experiment's kind of trajectory is, I try to do it on something much faster, so I can figure out where we're headed first, so I can figure out what's meaningful and what's real, where where meaningful insights exist, and versus which things are just can be tossed, um, before I go to kind of the full kind of longer term but slower to move in stack.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, otherwise it would be really slow, as you said.
Yeah,
um
it's an
yeah,
interesting process for sure.
yeah. I don't know if you know the SerentyOS project.
I'm only lightly familiar with it.
Okay, yeah. So he basically went through like a very very similar process, right? And on one of his videos or streams, he mentioned that,
And it's on Andreas, is that correct?
yeah, Andreas Kling,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I absolutely love following and watching his streams.
Oh yeah.
It's delightful.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember him saying that, um because someone asked him about advice on a similar
Mm,
subject, and he
yeah.
said something like he likes to start with the fun stuff and the high level stuff, and then works all the way down, right? So
Oh, interesting. Okay.
yeah, so
Yeah, I do
even
the
like,
same thing.
yeah. So like
Yeah.
for Serenity, he basically was using I think Qt at first.
Okay.
So he was using Qt, and then well, eventually reached down all the way to the bottom, right?
Yeah.
So
That's awesome.
yeah, that's
That's good to
I
know. That
love that
makes me
project. Yeah,
that's another point in the column of that method. Then I guess that makes me feel good. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So I do the same thing.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, are you planning to? Sorry, are you planning to do streams or do any type of like content, or are you still like you want to keep it like the way you're doing it?
I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know what what mediums people would enjoy the most, and that I would be most kind of helpful, to share via. So right now, I'm planning on releasing a series of articles and demo videos. That's the current plan, at least, just to kind of show people what's going on in some of the experiments and what questions they are asking. But so I'm not sure. I know the live stream thing has. It seems like people have taken to those, which kind of surprises me. I mean, I've seen some folks can live stream for 5 hours straight coding, and people are enthralled the whole time, which surprises me a little bit. I don't think anyone would be interested in watching me code live for very long at all. But I'm happy to experiment with whatever media people seem to want.
Yeah, yeah. I think like I've seen people like trying it, like people that I follow on Twitter, for
Yeah,
example, that are like starting to try that out,
yeah,
and some other people that have been doing it for a while. And there's definitely like a curve of like how comfortable they are
mm.
uh,
Yeah. It would
programming
be
and
super
streaming.
uncomfortable for a while. It
Yeah,
would take me a while to, I think, be good at that.
yeah,
I'm very good written. I do written well. I assume I would be much less good on a live stream. I could be wrong. I haven't tried it, but I assume
yeah,
I wouldn't. I would. It would take me a while to get into the medium and be able to do it fluently. I feel
yeah,
like there would be this like extra 20% tax in my brain, knowing that you know, and yeah.
yeah, yeah. I would
Whose
love
streams
to.
do? Yeah.
Oh wait, I would love to watch your streams. Like if you try it out, I'm definitely gonna be there.
Awesome. That's good
To
to
be
know. I'll
honest.
definitely let you know if I do. Whose streams do you like watching?
So one of the well, there's Andreas Kling, which is actually he doesn't stream. He let's say that he streams offline, so he records himself nonstop and
Mm-hmm.
then pushes that if he likes it. Um, but on Twitch, there's I don't remember his name, but he's the creator of the SIG programming language. Andrew,
What?
is it? I think he's Andrew.
Okay.
Yeah, the SIG
Okay.
programming language. I'm gonna type it out real quick. I don't know if you've heard about it.
Only the language, not the creator.
Yeah. So yeah, he streams every once in a while. I'm not sure
Okay.
about how often. I've watched him a few times when I see the links on Twitter,
Mm.
and I feel like he's very. I mean, he's a very charismatic person. So like,
Mm-hmm.
I watched a conference by him, and that got me hooked on SIG.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's. You could argue he might be like a natural in terms of
Mm-hmm.
like doing that,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
he does like sometimes debugging sessions
yeah. That's
on
impressive.
Twitch.
I really don't think I could do that. That's impressive.
I think debugging might be different. I don't know because debugging for me it's like thinking out loud sometimes just makes it better. Like sometimes even
Oh,
if
it's almost like rubber duck debugging
yeah,
with the live stream. That's interesting.
and you also get help from the stream, like people
Yeah, that's
point.
true.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah.
I
Um,
have to imagine I would be terrible at that.
and I think you wouldn't. I think yeah, I think you would do fine.
I
I
appreciate
mean,
that.
I don't.
I
Yeah,
appreciate the vote of confidence.
yeah. Um, But yeah, I would definitely watch that, and I think there's a lot of people who would as well. But if it wouldn't make sense if that makes you unproductive. Like, I mean, it
Yeah,
definitely has an
I
impact on
wonder.
it.
Yeah, I should I think I would need to watch a bunch of other people's streams first, to really understand uh, kind of the format and the thinking
Yeah,
behind it.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I recommend you that one. The
Okay, yeah, that's
I
good
think
to know.
Andrew is his name. Yeah,
Okay, yeah, I'll pull them up.
yeah. I'll send you a link to his Twitter profile.
Cool,
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. So, and now that we're on this train of thought, have you like, so you're currently, you have like your own Patreon kind of thing, right? So I think you're using like your own custom platform for that.
Yeah. So I'm using Memberful, which actually I think Patreon owns now. So yeah, I'm using Memberful, which yeah allows me to kind of roll my own deal, which is nice. I like I don't like having like honestly just not even being able to like choose the typeface of the title of my posts on something like Patreon would bug the heck out of me. You know what I mean? And so with Memberful, I have total control over it because I can just kind of roll it myself while they still handle kind of the back end.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's really nice. Yeah,
yeah.
and so you're currently planning, because I'm guessing right now you're somewhat part time, somewhat full time. I don't know how your time looks like, but I'm guessing you're planning. If not, I guess you're planning to go full time on it, and um, I mean, I
Yeah, I
guess
would
like
definitely.
living out of it.
Yeah, I would definitely like to spend more time on the core work. To some degree, I think it's good that I do have to spend some time on other things because it makes sure that there's variance in my inputs in my day and the things I'm thinking about and working on. But at the same time, I would very much like to be spending more time on the research work, and a little bit less time on other projects that generate revenue. You know,
Got it.
so yeah. So I've got the membership program, which has been delightful. I can't believe anybody wants to chip in a few bucks a month. That's been really wild to see, and it's been really cool to see so many kind of members join up. It's something I just started experimenting with this year, and I'll take sponsorships on for the WonderOS project itself, and so I'll list sponsors on there. And hopefully, my hope is between those two, I'll be able to increase the amount of time that I get to spend on the research work, and in the highest ideal, if there's enough if there are enough sponsors interested in supporting the WonderOS project, then I'll be able to bring on another person or two to help out with some of this stuff, and move into hardware, that kind of thing.
Awesome. Yeah, that would be really cool.
Yeah.
Um, and do you have like I mean, long term, um, do you plan on making like having a business model around the OS, or is it going to be like an open source thing?
Right now, I don't know. I think I'm waiting as long as possible to come up with answers for questions like that. I'm trying to leave those questions open for as long as I can until it becomes so blaringly obvious what the right answer is that I can't not choose it.
Yeah, that's a smart thing because I think, I mean, I imagine if I were in that situation, I think I would overthink that. Like I would find myself spending too much time thinking on something that's not.
Yeah, my mind runs on that from time to time, but I try to give it its due time and then background it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Well, jumping back on more on the more technical side of things. Um, yeah. So, how do you see like artificial intelligence mixing with this? Is
Mm,
that something you think about, or?
that's interesting. Anything in particular?
Yeah, because something that I've thought about before is if we want to really be helped by an intelligent autonomous system in our computer, like a tiny person living there, I think that
Mm,
having a system like yours really just makes everything work perfectly. Because essentially, what you have is you have your own designer, programmer your computer so that you can just tell it to do stuff for you, like,
Sure.
like, and not even like, I don't even imagine it so much in like audio, like, hey, like whatever name, do this, but rather more like, I would say it progress as like a chat prompt. Like, I mean, we
Mm,
already have this if you think about it, like when you
mm,
hit command space with the spotlight, or any command palette that you have on any given app, like you already have some kind of form of communication with a context, right?
yeah.
So I would imagine that if you have access to all the views and all the items, and like it's a very like
Yep.
flat system in that sense. Yeah, I don't know. It would make sense, in my opinion, to do that.
I agree with you. I agree 100%. I wish. Well, so there's a lot of layers to it. So you're totally right. So the idea is that if you imagine that all of your items across your entire personal computing domain, across all your devices, et cetera, all your services, what have you, are all in one accessible item drive. And even if you consider this as kind of a virtual concept, and maybe each piece of data might be lived in God knows where, but the idea is that you could access it all in one. It's like the soup on the Newton in the 90s, just kind of one storage look of all your items. Then totally, there's some really weird and interesting things, and I think um, the thinking I could offer on that today would be wildly unimaginative, because I think the potential for what thinking could do, with letting AI run wild with in that environment, could be really vast. And usually we can only see a few steps forward into the future from where we happen to be today. So I can only see a few steps forward, which I assume would be, so it's not here's the terminal idea so much as here are the next kind of few steps, that should hopefully look wildly unimaginative, you know, long into the future. But there's a lot of really cool things you can do. So you've got all your items in one, item drive. Um, One thing that I'm really curious about is we have tons of items. I mean, even if you just think about your photos, like everyone's taking photos all the time. You have all these photos, and so then a lot of idea concepts are popping up on how do we surface the ones that are important, that kind of thing, because you can no longer manage it like it used to be. And you would like build photo albums even digitally, right? But like it's just so much now that people can't really even bother with that. But so the idea, you've got all your items in your item drive. Um, like I want to see, like we should be using natural language processing to figure out what are the unlinked related items to any given item. If I'm writing a note, and there's an email related email, how can it figure that out, right? How can it help me pull up or other related notes that I've taken, or web pages that I've saved or visited, that I'm either referencing directly or that are touching on concepts that I've already touched on before or learned before, that kind of thing. Can we use natural language processing to to find unlinked related references within kind of your item drive. Views is an interesting one. I've seen certainly compelling demos when it comes to declarative interface languages, being able to just tell something like something akin to GPT-3, tell it, give me a view that has X, Y, and Z in these certain ways, and then it can literally write the code. I'm not sure about GPT-3 specifically, but there are demos that do this, where then it just writes the declarative interface code to do what you asked it to do, and that's really compelling, because that means that when in WonderOS's declarative view language, it could potentially be taught to a system that you could feed it stuff. One interesting idea I saw someone put up when DALL-E 2 came out was, because you can people in some people, if visual thinkers is definitely a thing. I'm not sure if it is, but can recall certain notes based on kind of visuals easier than they can necessarily specific text. And certainly it's much easier to scan a series of visuals rather than a bunch of text from a bunch of different notes. So can you use DALL-E 2 to run, to generate a unique image on top of each note that's kind of based on the note, right? And to be able to kind of quickly, that was a quick demo I saw someone put up on Twitter weeks ago. So like that's another example of thing that you could run. And another experiment with WonderOS is, as you said, with the chat, thing. One of the wonderful things about an itemized operating system, or thinking about operating systems or the personal computing environment as an itemized space, is you don't have to interact with it through keyboard, mouse, screen. So you've got all your items in your item drive. Can you can you have an audio conversation? Can you text it? Can you that kind of thing? And in the declarative views in Wonderful, you can define not just how it should lay out on a screen, but you can also define an item script. Text that could be transmitted, such as through a text, or spoken aloud with a text to speech system. So, or if you're in a low bandwidth area, could you call your computer from somewhere else and like talk to it, like get information about the items in your item drive, and have it read off the scripts of the items that you're looking for. And so when you look at what does it look like then to chat with your system, which knows about all of your items, certainly AI can play a role at making that better. There have been very compelling demos in that space. There have been very non-compelling, implementations in that space as well. I think all of them are certainly worth exploring. It's a space that I don't know nearly enough about. So again, my thinking on it, I have to imagine, or I have to hope, is wildly unimaginative. But yeah, I totally agree. If I would love to put someone who loves thinking about those kinds of things, in the hands of a WonderOS system, and let them just kind of run wild, see what they come
Yeah.
up with.
Yeah, that would be really, really amazing. And it's definitely a big topic. And I feel like recently, I feel like in technology, we're closing a few gaps, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like we're closing some cycles, if
Yeah,
that
it's
makes sense.
funny to see like OpenAI and other teams really starting to deliver on the hypotheses that were laid out many decades ago. It's fun to see that kind of progress. Um, I,
Yeah.
I, I, I my ideal dream is that the world has more entities like that doing that kind of work.
Yeah. Yeah. And also like with your work and with operating systems and UI, and I feel like, yeah, in general, we're kind of realizing, like, okay, the past few decades have been this way, but we need to start thinking differently about it and develop new tools. And I don't know if it's because I'm really surrounded by this and I'm just like seeing it everywhere because that's what I see and I pay attention to. But I do feel like, I don't know, I feel um, positive. I feel, what's the word? I don't know. Optimista, it's in Spanish,
Optimistic,
but
yeah.
optimistic.
Optimistic,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I feel optimistic um, about the future of computing. Like sometimes it
Yeah.
looks like when I see projects that just keep pushing on like the fact, uh, like on the like keep putting stuff on top of the what doesn't work right now to solve problems that we have. Like I feel like that's going in the inverse direction. Like I understand
Mm.
the business value of that solution. Like for example,
Hmm.
I don't know if you've heard about the it's a new not a new browser. It's just Google but remote. I don't
Okay.
remember how it's called. But
Oh, Mighty.
basically, Mighty. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So like, yeah, it solves a lot of problems business wise, but I feel like it goes the other way when it comes,
Mm.
in terms of like progress and like thinking about the hard problems that we need to solve too.
Yeah, that one's an interesting one. The prompt that they are responding to, yeah, I'm not sure if I totally agree with, but it's really cool to see. I will say this: the team in solving the problems that they need to solve to make that product work. They have to come up with a lot of things. I mean, borderline inventing completely new technologies that I don't know. I'm not. I haven't seen anything inside of the company, but I have to assume they're having to invent some seriously new stuff to make a lot of that stuff work. And I have to hope the industry is better off for those things existing. Whether or not I think that streaming browser sessions like that. Well, there's use cases. There's always use cases for everything everywhere. But I get you. For me, yeah, I want my compute local. You know,
Yeah.
I personally don't want to offsite my computing power or even my browsing sessions. That doesn't mean that they don't have a viable business, and they're certainly doing hard and interesting and important things, and so that's a lot of fun to watch. But yeah, I agree. I personally want my compute local.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like mixed feelings about it. Because,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Well, and that's of course. I think I feel that way about a lot of the technology, a lot of new stuff, and I agree. There's always um, there's a balance there. It seems like there's and this has nothing to do with Mighty. This is back to your original point. But yeah, there's often a business case where time to market can be a lot shorter with you know certain technologies that are already available
Yeah.
and kind of continuing to build on top. But I agree from a computer science perspective. A lot of times it looks like we're putting heaping piles of code on top of other heaping piles of code, and I would like to see um, rather than heaping piles of code deliver small business KPIs. From a computer science perspective, I would really like to see us think about and reify how personal computing's potential. I feel like it has this enormous potential in life, and so often it's people experience it somewhat negatively, and I feel like it fulfills like 2% of its potential. So I'm with you.
Yeah.
I love the I was really excited to see I guess a decade ago, almost a decade ago now, when Alan Kay was, starting his Viewpoints Research Institute, the idea of can we start from scratch, you know, go again, and see what it looks like to build, from nothing, from switches on up into personal computing. That I'm curious to see if more people engage in that kind of thinking,
Yeah.
where we might be able to move, personal computing in pursuit of supporting, you know, supporting people's daily lives rather than
Yeah.
inhibiting them in ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I wonder how much impact would uh, crowdfunded projects have on this. Like, um, because I mean, if it's like a circle, if you think about it, right? Like, the people who want the good stuff are paying the people who also want the good stuff to create the good stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like I feel like that's a move in the right direction. Like, seeing more and more crowdfunded projects and open source projects that work this way. I think I'm
Yeah,
excited about that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Me too.
And so I know that you use Obsidian for your
Hmm.
notes. Would you call it a personal wiki in terms of your work, or
For in my own personal use,
yeah, like for your projects, or like
yeah, for me, I do use it as a very wiki like. I don't use it as much today as maybe I did 3 months ago.
oh, okay,
3 and more months ago, I used it, all day, every day. Um, these days, since I'm, doing more and more in WonderOS, I've gone a little bit back to the basics with like the Notes app and the Reminders app and that kind of thing,
got it. Yeah.
just to decrease complexity in my life when the complexity of my notes in WonderOS engages not just the complexity of the notes, but of the system that it's in, and trying to figure out
Mm,
how all of those things, all the layers should be working at once. Um, and I often found in Obsidian, and this is nothing wrong with Obsidian. It's probably just something wrong with me. I was able to make a mess very very quickly, very easily.
yeah.
It was very easy for me to make a mess of my notes, um, and I didn't like that. I need my tooling. In my tooling, I need a little bit more, not structure, something. I'm still tinkering with it. I'm playing with how my notes work in WonderOS. So like right now, I'm working on this experiment and it might be nothing. So don't, take this with a huge grain of salt. This could be nothing. But I'm working my current experiment with the current thing that I'm putting my notes into. I have threads of notes where, like in your list of where you would have like a list of notes in a traditional piece of software with like your most recently edited note at the top. In the experiment that I'm working on right now, the it's threads, and same thing. The most recently edited one is at the top, and then in each thread, there are notes, and and it's inverse. Maybe I should flip it, but it works like email. The where your most recent note is at the bottom, and you're always scroll to the bottom, and you can scroll back up. But so the idea is that I can manage threads of notes. So all of my notes on um, in each thing that I'm thinking about, a concept, a project, learning something new, that kind of thing. I have a thread, and in each one, as my thinking continues, develops, evolves, grows, whatever, iterates, I just add new notes into it, and so you've got this kind of stack of these orbed notes that kind of go down in the thread, and so I can always see my latest thinking right there, scrolled to at the bottom. I can always jump back and see how my thinking iterated, see if I've missed, if there's a gap that I missed or something, lost something on the way. Um, and that structure and notes can be a part of multiple threads. So it's still the itemized OS. So, everything can be referenced from anything else as many times as you want. So, a note might be in multiple threads. And that structure has helped me to keep my externalized thinking more organized, without me needing to manicure the mess on a daily and weekly basis. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like without the maintenance part, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I've had a lot of different experiments at that. This is just one of them. There are things I like about it, things I don't like about it. But yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm playing with finding different ways to,
Cool.
using Obsidian as a wiki, is really interesting and really nice. But yeah, I can make a mess of it very quickly because I'm taking notes all day long,
Yeah.
spelling out different things. You know what I mean? Developing thoughts
Yeah.
on like 8 different trains of thought all within an hour. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so, like the threads, for example, is very helpful for me because I can just immediately drop things where they need to be. I can always see the latest thinking, that kind of thing. I can review older things. It's very easy. Where when and it's my fault. It's nothing wrong with Obsidian.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can make a mess of my notes in Obsidian very quickly because of the volume of notes that I'm pushing out. Are you the same way?
Yeah. So I am, and I recently moved to Obsidian, and
What were you using before?
so I have a bunch of like I have a bunch of notes everywhere, right? So
Yeah,
like I have
yeah, me
notes on
too.
paper, notes on like Apple Notes, Bear
Yeah,
Notes, etc. Right?
yeah.
Um, but what I do now is like in terms of work, like I divide it into domains, right? So like Bear Notes, I use it like for personal stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
like about my career,
Mm-hmm.
about like about the podcast, about
Mm-hmm.
everything that's like even like housing stuff, what like
Uh-huh.
whatever. Um, then Apple Notes, I use it like as paper. It's like, oh, I
Okay.
need to don't
Scratch
forget this
notes.
code.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. And then paper notes are the same way. I mean, I used to write a lot on paper before,
Mm-hmm.
but then I found myself going back to them and just having a lot of trouble navigating
Mm-hmm.
them. So right now, for work, I use Obsidian
Mm-hmm.
because I couldn't find anything. And right now, my main project is I'm working on. I'm also like just experimenting with ideas in terms of like how would you create an artificial mind. It's
Okay.
not artificial intelligence because that's
Sure.
narrow and that's like domain specific.
Okay.
It's a different thing. One person called AI just a very fancy compression algorithm, which I
Okay.
agree because it's like, yeah, I mean, it just take a bunch of input and you compress it into a concept or multiple
Yeah.
concepts,
Yeah.
Um, so for me, artificial minds is different. It's more like, okay, what makes a mind a mind? It's not just
Mm.
intelligence, it's a bunch of things. You
Mm.
cannot have an isolated mind as a program and just expect that to be anywhere similar to how we work. I think that it's more similar to a video game,
Okay.
in the sense that a video game is like a full universe,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So like within the video game, you have a world, and you have instances in that world, and you have rules that govern that world and that govern the instances in that world. So I feel like a mind needs to have a world that, and that those both things, are very intimately connected.
Mm-hmm.
um, and that world, we as humans also need to be there in order to collaborate, but
Mm.
most importantly in order to like teach. So like I don't think that we're gonna develop an artificial mind that, it's just like, oh, I finished coding, let me compile it. Oh, it knows stuff.
Yeah.
Like, so right now the problem with AI that I see is that it's very expensive because you need a lot of training data and you need a lot of
Mm.
computing power. But that's not how we work. Like that's not how animals work. And like a lot of the like smart, the ones that we consider like smarter animals, um, they rely a lot on being raised, like
Mm.
learning from observing parents and their interactions with the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like the missing part. It's like we're not paying attention at that at all. Like,
Interesting.
yeah.
And how would you imagine interacting with such a system?
Like the operating system, you mean, or
An artificial mind, as you're describing it.
like interacting with what system?
The artificial mind that
Yeah, yeah.
you're conceiving. Yeah.
But what was the question?
Oh, how would you imagine interacting with that as a concept?
But
Like,
with
is this software you would interact with, or no?
Oh, got it. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. I mean, you can. I see it as an emulator kind of thing,
Okay.
right? So because an emulator basically tries to simulate um, the components of like the crucial bits of a system, right? So like if you're trying to emulate a specific type of processor, you're not gonna emulate like all the transistors and like a lot of things, right? Like you're
Mm.
just gonna try to have like a set. You want to have like all the instructions laid out and all the mechanics that make those instructions work, but you don't need anything else. So I see it in a very similar fashion. It's definitely going to be like a piece of software that
Mm.
takes some kind of input, right? And I'm thinking that you're definitely gonna need a server, just like with an online RPG, for example. Like you need a server that hosts all the players, right? And that makes the world persistent through time.
Mm.
So you need something similar. You need a world, and then each artificial mind would be like a client, let's say, that
Uh-huh.
interacts with it. So like that, the input would be like within that channel of connection, if that
Mm.
makes sense.
Okay.
And then our input with, or like our communication with them would be the same way that you would communicate with another player in a video game, right? Like you have a chat
Okay.
box, or like you have a not
Yeah.
only a chat box, but you also have like different means of interacting with them, right? Like we have that in
Yeah.
video games already. So yeah, that's kind of like my way of thinking. And going back
Yeah.
to the notes thing, I like about 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, when I started thinking about this. Well, like it was just like a bunch of ideas, and I didn't know like how to organize them. Like it was just like a lot of things everywhere, and most things became outdated and were not usable very
Mm-hmm.
fast. And so with Obsidian, I I organized it in a way that allows me to like just, okay, I have this idea, I know where to put it. It goes right here.
Mm.
But because I use Obsidian only for that project,
Yeah.
it's easier to just like organize my ideas because I don't have to think about
Uh-huh.
like, oh, like there are personal stuff
It's
here.
not
There's like,
nebulous. Yeah.
yeah, it's more like, okay, it's like I'm documenting code, or like if I'm documenting something, like it's more like a documentation.
Yeah.
And I just like throw the ideas where I think they go. And if there's not a
Yeah.
place that they fit in, well, that's interesting, because it means that there's something that I need to think about that. Um,
Mm.
you know, it may be something new. There might be like a change that needs to happen. But otherwise, like there's just a place that I can throw that in and revisit
Uh-huh.
that later if I
Yeah.
need to. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my difficulty comes. That makes sense. I think my difficulty comes from, um, there's plenty of software that makes it very easy to capture thinking. There's plenty of software that makes it easy to polish thinking, into like writing to publish. But there's obviously very, very little software that helps you do the middle part, the synthesizing your thinking. So often I'll have stubs of things where I don't know where they go yet because um, I don't yet know what the categories of thought are until later. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
once there's enough things and they kind of glob together into these kind of two concepts, you know what I mean? Then I've got like two buckets to put them in. But when there's kind of new stubs that are orbiting around some star, but I don't know what that star is yet, and I don't know what else is orbiting around it. I know things that might be, but they might be orbiting around something else. It's that kind of the synthesizing thoughts, putting things together, seeing how they fit together, putting things with other things, seeing how those fit. Generating kind of the new thinking based on the things that are sitting around in the field of view. People are putting together new pieces of software that are interesting around that. I playing with tangent notes, Scrintile, Muse, like those things that are like looking at, okay, so we've captured the thinking, we're not able to polish yet. Can we synthesize? How do we synthesize the thinking? I find that a lot of when whatever I use for capturing thinking is naturally where I end up trying to synthesize the thoughts, and maybe that's bad and an anti-pattern. I don't know, but then that's where I run into trouble.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. I guess it depends on the maturity of the project, or of the thing as well, right? Because
Yeah,
yeah, especially like because if you're in a stage of experimenting and like just trying out things and like figuring out what works and what doesn't, yeah, it's hard to know. It's hard to abstract that into categories and like organize that
yeah.
information.
The
Um,
helpful thing with Obsidian is since it's so open with its plugin ecosystem, there are a lot of different views that you can kind of pop in to experiment with, ways to organize the things in your workspace as you're developing your thoughts and synthesizing your thinking.
yeah, yeah, it's really
So that
cool.
that is nice, but I can still make a mess of it so fast.
Yeah, 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 it's definitely easy. And yeah, I encountered that personal wiki term. There's this. There are two Canadians, Quebecois, from, I don't remember their names, but they're a couple that lives in a boat. I don't know if
Oh,
you've.
Hunter Rabbits.
Yeah, 100 rabbits. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah. So this guy, he has his own personal wiki, and he calls him like that. And somewhere in there he says like you should write your own personal wiki, like
yeah. Mm-hmm.
like he recommends that a lot, right?
Like from
uh,
scratch.
I don't, I like, he doesn't specify if it needs
Oh,
to be from
oh, but
scratch.
you should create one is what he's saying.
Yeah, like,
I'm with
and
you, like in an existing tool.
yeah, and
Okay,
for me, like that changed my perspective a little bit,
interesting.
because it's, for me it's not the same as like having a place to store my notes. Like it's not the
Uh
same
huh.
thing, because a wiki is meant for collaboration, and it's meant for
Hmm.
organizing ideas, right? So,
Hmm.
or like organizing synthesized ideas rather than new ideas, I guess. So yeah, I like that different approach, because then I can divide like those two parts, and they don't need to live together, right? Like you need
Yeah.
like all the new crazy stuff can go into a place that's more well designed for that, like
Mm-hmm.
Muse, for example.
Uh huh.
And then the other part is more like, oh, well, this is, this is for things to mature, and
Yeah, I'm
like,
with you.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I like that idea, and I was gonna ask you if at some point you were thinking about creating some kind of documentation or not, or like a wiki of sorts. Like I mean, you have your lab notes right now,
Mm.
but I see it more like as a like a set of notes, right?
Hmm.
And experiments and prototypes. So yeah, I don't know what you think about that.
What would be in it?
So right now you have a few lab notes, and you talk about what items are and what services are, and like different concepts.
I'm with you.
So like if there was like a wiki, it's more like, oh, item,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
service, this connects to this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my first member magazine, I did put kind of an index or something like that where it kind of worked that way, um, which was helpful for me. I mean, even my wife uses it as a quick lookup when she's reading some of my stuff and doesn't remember one of the things, um, which it's that's a helpful guide for me. I had wondered if I should. I hadn't done it yet because I didn't want to set anything in stone too early, because a lot of the concepts have been fluid. So some of the concepts in the earlier lab notes have definitely evolved beyond how they're described currently. So I didn't want to do it too soon. I uh, Everything about the project I tried to gear around making experiments, easy to run quickly. And so setting concepts in stone, for example, can create just a little bit more sludge for an experiment to have to wade through. So not yet, but I agree. I think once things are settled, and it's currently an ongoing research project. When it's time to call it good, like it has happened, its ideas are what they are, and they're good, and need to be published in full. I think that would be a really, really good thing to do towards the end of kind of closing the chapter on its at least this stage of its kind of research and experimentation nature.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree it would be a good thing, but I've intentionally not done it yet.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, no, that makes a
Yeah,
lot of sense. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, the 100 Rabbits folks are really cool. I really enjoy
Yeah.
following them. My wife and I used to travel full time around in an RV, and we loved following all the people who were full time in RVs and sailboats. The sailing thing is crazy. My wife was always trying to convince me when we were full time RVing, leading into the pandemic, to be open to full time sailing, but like the level of stress, I can't even imagine. It gets very stressful. Things are constantly breaking. When you're in an RV, worst case scenario, you're a few hundred miles from the nearest repair place that has the part you need or whatever, and you're on land. And
Yeah.
I can't even imagine the stress in a on a boat. We follow a good handful of full time sailors, of cruisers, and the trials and tribulations they go through. Their patience is impressive. Full time RVing definitely tested my patience. I think cruising would be a whole other world.
Oh
It's
yeah, I
it's a lot
can.
of fun following those folks though. 100 Rabbits, they're a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I can imagine. Because I've thought about, like, I like to entertain the idea of like doing that, but like on
Mm,
practice, I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure. And my girlfriend,
mm,
she's like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. And yeah, I don't think I'm definitely like it's something that I would like to do, but it's like,
mm,
you know, would versus should, I guess. Like,
mm.
it's like I would, but I think I should not. But
And
yeah,
where are you
definitely.
located?
So I'm currently in Guadalajara, in Mexico.
Nice, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was getting married, when my wife and I were marrying, I asked her if our honeymoon could be just like a week long road trip, and she said no, and she was right too. And we had a wonderful time in Puerto Rico, rather than being on the road. So, but then a year later or 2 years later, we did a cross country. We did a coast to coast thing across North America and back in 3 weeks, and we were like super hooked immediately. So within, I don't know, 2 years from then, we gave away most of our things and house, and hopped into an RV, and spent the better part of a few years, all the way into the pandemic, just kind of traveling around North America, and working from and exploring every national park and state park and little town, big city that kind of popped up on the path, which was I don't know, it was there's nothing quite like it that I've found. It was a really cool, not therapeutic. It was there were a lot of times that we spent in total solace. We spent a lot of time on the border, on the Rio Grande, and we would be hours away from the nearest like grocery store, even, and it was just crazy peaceful. And we would boondock out there we would be camping with no hookups. So we're like running on our own like solar power and generator, and running on our own tank. So we're not hooked up to anything. And so we would be boondocking out in the Rio Grande, and the stars were insane. I grew up in DC, where you really can't see much in the night sky. Absolutely beautiful. It was while we were in the RV. We were out in rural Colorado and Wyoming, boondocking all the way through Wyoming on our way up to Grand Tetons National Park, that I first hit on most of the ideas that I've been publishing in my lab notes. Like so many of those, they like just started hitting while I was like out in the middle of nowhere, not connected to anything, spending as much time away from computers as possible, and with people, and in new environments. And it was very. I think my best thinking on computing comes when I'm the furthest away from computers.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess your subconscious is like, well, where's my usual dose of computing and stuff like that? Like,
yeah, I think that, and it can jump a little bit further ahead. It's not mired by the plague that is today's personal computing software.
Yeah, that's really cool. That sounds really amazing. And the folks at 100 Rabbits, like, yeah, I mean, I think that's essentially why I forget his name. I think Deviant, but it's not Deviant. It's something with D. But anyways, so the programmer, like, it was because of it was because of like the conditions that give living on a sailboat that he decided to go like full in minimal things from scratch.
Yeah.
I own my own shit, and
yeah,
and I
low
found
power, low bandwidth.
Yeah, low power. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really amazing.
Yeah, because I think they're like he uses like a Raspberry Pi full time, doesn't he? Is that right?
He uses multiple devices.
Okay.
Yeah, what he's
Which
currently
is a lot
doing,
of fun, and he builds his stuff from scratch. Like he builds all his software from scratch.
Yeah, like he created his
fun.
own like virtual machine, basically.
Yeah.
So like,
yeah, that's right. That's cool.
Yeah, that's really, really cool.
Yeah, it was when we were out there. Our bandwidth was very low sometimes when we were out in the middle of nowhere. And actually, ironically, it was even worse when we were in some of this, some cities, just because of throttling. Because in our RV we had a Wi-Fi router that connected to 4G, and
Got it.
And it could also connect to other Wi-Fi. Bundles it all together, streams it into the RV as its own Wi-Fi network. So everything was on that. But so a lot of times our bandwidth was insanely low. And so that's when I really hit on some of the stuff around, in an itemized operating system, I want to be able to like text my thing, you know what I mean? Like text my personal computing domain and ask like for something, you know what I mean? Events on the calendar, whatever it is, because there are times where it won't load a dang thing, on given the bandwidth. And so having, multimodal interactions with one central, itemized system just gives you, that much more freedom, right? And in my case, at the time, that would have given me freedom to explore the continent more deeply. You know what I mean? And that's the kind of freedom that our technology should be giving people in their daily lives every day today. but so often, but all our data is locked up in all these little silos, and you can
Yeah.
only access it the one way, and it's through a an Electron app that you're not going to be able to download while you're out in the middle
Yeah.
of Sedona, in the middle of the desert, right? Until you go to town and get to the coffee shop. And so like being able to just have an itemized route, put all my items in a thing and let me interact with it, in the modes that giving people that freedom, I think, is something personal computing should be doing. It should have been doing for a long time now.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, like, and that makes sense even like for like if we could even take that like all the way to like space exploration where like
Mm.
like you really need the freedom uh to like because like it takes a long time to like communicate something that's like really really far away. So I mean that's definitely not like a problem that exists right now. But yeah, like I wouldn't like to systems to be still so limited in that sense. Like I love the idea that you have about texting your system and like just like I think of it like querying it for stuff,
Yeah,
like
yeah, exactly.
yeah. And you can
Like it would
paste
almost feel like texting yourself, like
yeah,
a
like
version of
yourself on
yourself that has
like
permanent memory.
yeah, and always
Um,
access to the computer.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I
Yeah.
should be able to do that. I need to build
Yeah.
a demo of that soon. I put together all the pieces at some point, but I never put together a demo and published it in a lab note. I should do that soon.
That would be real cool. Yeah. Yeah, nice. Um well, I think I covered most of my questions. Let me check real quick. Oh yeah. So I mean, you have already developed quite a few terms, right? So like items, you have item views, etc. Um, and you already told me like how you think it's gonna go in terms of like formalizing those. Um, but that got me thinking, and like also like thinking about the artificial mind thing. Is how do you see like all of this terminology uh, evolve into something that everyone can talk about? So like right now we have Windows, we have like we have existing concepts that are very well known now, and like patterns that we recognize. So yeah, how do you see that evolving, and do you think that the education system needs to evolve around that, and like how we teach about computers, basically?
Yeah, really lovely question. Yes to any of the questions there that were yes no questions, and then yeah, so with WonderOS, there are kind of three major phases to the project as I'm envisioning it now. The first phase is kind of focuses on software, on traditional form factors of devices. The second focuses on hardware, new form factors of devices, having an evolvable, hardware system to pair with your evolvable software system. And then the third focuses on society, um, on computer thinking. So the idea is that I don't know the answer, but I feel like I'm getting close to some of the right questions. Um, Once we figure out the right primitives with which we do personal computing. So, for example, items might be one such primitive. They might not be, but they might be, right? That's something WonderOS experiments with. Once we find the right primitives with which we do personal computing, which obviously we have not found those primitives now because of how, you know, frustrating personal computing can be in different ways. Your data is locked up, that kind of thing. Once we find those right primitives, then we need to hone in on a streamlined mental model, right? So if you
Yeah.
think as a developer of like, I don't know, like Redux, as like Redux is like such a streamlined mental model. If you as a developer hop into a code base where all of the state is managed in Redux, you can navigate your way around like right away. No, if you need to find, you can go find something you need to find relatively easily because it's a very streamlined mental model. The whole picture, the big picture, no matter how complex the software, if it abides by the kind of Redux rules, if you will, the whole picture can fit in your head at once, right? Which is a rare thing with software, but is needed to make software good. Um, So we find the primitives with which we do personal computing. We're already thinking in terms of those primitives, but our computers aren't, and we don't know what they are yet. But we keep experimenting until we figure out what that language is we're trying to use with computers. We find the primitives, and then I think then the next step is streamline the mental model, and that gets you two things. First, that makes the systems evolvable. With a streamlined mental model, we should be able to kind of reify those concepts within these systems, within our software and hardware systems, so that anyone within the computing community, if you will, users and developers alike, and user developers, which could be a concept that pops up. Anyone can evolve their system or help evolve other people's systems, with this streamlined mental model. And then the big thing, I think, is we think about what is computer thinking. How do we teach these primitives to kids, for example, right? So in school, you learn how to read language, you learn how to write language, then you learn arithmetic, and when you're learning arithmetic, you're learning addition and subtraction, and that's not like a different kind of arithmetic. Addition and subtraction. Addition is what you use once you learn multiplication. Multiplication is addition multiple times over, and so forth, all the way through math, right? You're constantly using those base operations, primitives, the deeper you go into math. And so should the same be with then reading and writing, arithmetic, then you learn computer thinking, right? So then what are those primitives that we would learn as kids? So to make basically living arithmetic, right? What does it look like? What are these primitives that with which we interact with computers that allow us to do the kinds of things that we need computers to do, to continue building, society and our lives and our life's work. And how do we streamline the primitives, the mental model, such that we can teach the base things to kids, so that we can learn those things from childhood. We learn arithmetic, then we start learning that, and so that everything then that's more complex, like integrals in arithmetic, so that the things that we learn are more complex are based on those first core primitives, so that we can develop our computer literacy as we grow from kids to adults, and become more fluent in using our personal computing ecosystems, right? Which should by then be more than a device, for example. So I think the society piece is a very important one. Not just looking at what should personal computing be tomorrow in software and hardware, but what does that mean for society? How does it support people's daily lives? And how can we empower the next generation of people, of kids, to learn what they would need to know to control these wonder machines that we have before us in making things a little bit better.
Yeah,
I think that's a very important piece of it.
got it. Yeah, definitely. And as you said, it's like we can only know that until later, until we're using it, until we're like
Yeah.
familiarized with it.
And that scares me, because then I'm afraid, the question lingers in my head: what if we don't get to that step, right? I
Yeah,
think that would really suck. And part of that's selfish. Like I want to see us get to that step, like soon.
yeah.
But why do you ask? Can I ask that?
Why do I ask about which part? Because there were many.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. Oh, because
Yeah, about computer thinking and literacy, computer literacy in childhood, that kind of thing. That whole aspect of it.
yeah, because I feel like, well, giving a little bit of context, I dropped out of high school because I hated school.
Mm.
And then I taught myself programming when I was 12. And so I've, been going that direction. I did some freelance, etc. And it always frustrated me that whatever they were teaching me in school about computers was wrong or just not updated. And that's one of the things. And the other thing that has even more impact, that has more weight to this subject is like whenever I see, like kids, like my little sister, for example, she's about 10 years old, and whenever I see her, and she also doesn't like school, and I know that there's a lot of kids who don't like school for different reasons, but when I see them, and like if I play with them or if I talk with them and see what they like, most of what they like nowadays is related to computers or
Mm-hmm.
related to technology or phones or games or and like or social
Sure.
media or and like for me it's just like a bunch of potential right there
Mm.
that has nowhere to go right now.
Yeah.
So like like my sister once asked me like, hey, can you help me set up like a YouTube channel because I want to record
Mm.
Minecraft.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
some like things like those, like right now, like the education system, at least here in Mexico, and I think maybe in most places, are not gonna see her interest in doing that as something worth looking into and
Yeah,
investing into,
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
and I feel like that's deeply related with how we see computers and
Yeah.
how we understand. Like, I think if people understood what computers are really useful for, like
Mm.
the potential they have,
Yeah.
even like with tools right now, um, I think our thinking would be very different at a level of
Yeah.
like society, right? Like, yeah, like I think we would evolve faster as a
Yeah.
society.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like even something like, setting up a YouTube channel, the far future equivalent of that in a personal computing domain that reifies, some ramp up of computer literacy from, some primitives that we've discerned as that we use to communicate with computers and personal computing. Um, Setting up a YouTube channel should, require a kid to learn the base operations with which they do much of personal computing. In some ways, that is actually true today, which is kind of interesting. But in a lot of ways, it's not. And yeah, so that's interesting. That said, the interest in it, the interest in it is interesting. Uh, I've seen the same. Um, um, and the kids that I get to watch grow up, like technology, so far as a form of self-expression, which um, is kind of a wonderful thing. That's a high ideal, right? That's a high bar, and I think we can lament, you know, uh, you could claim that that's just everyone wants to be an influencer or whatever, but the idea of using computing for self-expression shouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. There can certainly be um, bad ends to it, but it's interesting.
Yeah,
It's funny because like decades ago computers were like viewed as like the like nerdiest, at best you can do some accounting with it. It's funny to see it as a canvas for self-expression now.
definitely. Yeah, and in very surprising ways sometimes, like unexpected ways, very niche sections of
Mm, mm.
software.
Any good examples?
Oh yeah, so like on the more nerdy side, so like all the customizations when it comes to like, I don't know if you're familiar with the term Unix born.
Okay.
So like, yeah, so like all the customizability on Linux and like theming and
Okay.
like
Yeah.
just like there's a whole community on that,
Okay.
which is kind of niche, right?
Mm,
Um, then I would go into hardware, thinking about keyboards.
mm.
Like if you
It's a good one.
go into that rabbit hole, man, it's
Yeah. Mm.
like there's just a ton of things there.
And the hardware thing, man, I got to start playing with hardware. And I started a little bit, but I need to go a little bit deeper. The hardware thing is interesting. We use these personal computers, personal computing devices, to do our life's work, and yet they all look the same.
Yeah.
No two guitarists have guitars that look the same. They reflect they don't they reflect the creator. If you go to the mod shop on fender.com, you can customize a Fender to look ugly as sin, and Fender will make it and send it to you and put their logo on it, because it's
Yeah.
not a reflection of them, the company. It's a reflection of the creator, the artist who's going to use it to do their life's work, right? But we couldn't be further from that with computers, which is awful. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
many of us use it to create our life's work, and yet it reflects not us, the creator, but the company that makes it. So and the keyboards is such a great example of how much appetite there is for
Yeah.
having the hardware reflect yourself, the creator, using this tool, this artistic tool, if you will. And I look forward to the day that we can start doing that with the rest of the computing hardware.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like I have a cousin of mine who's a musician, and
Mm,
he uses he uses a very like the most janky laptop ever.
mm.
Like it has no screen. The keyboard is incomplete, and just janky as hell. And like he uses Windows 7, but he
Mm.
sometimes sets the theme to a high contrast, not because he
Okay.
needs to, but just because he likes the aesthetic
He
of
likes the
it.
way it
And
looks.
yeah,
That's
and
super funny.
yeah, and he
I love
uses
that.
FL Studio, and
Yeah.
there's also like some level of customizability in there.
Uh-huh.
Um, and he also likes to customize it a lot. Like he changes backgrounds everywhere where he can. Like
Hmm.
if there's an option to customize it and it makes sense for him to do so, like he's gonna do it.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah,
feel
we want to
like
we want to mold our workspaces, right? Like
yeah,
you want to
exactly,
redo your kitchen, you want to redecorate
exactly.
your office, you want to remodel your RV, but we can't
We
do that with
can't.
our digital workspaces so often, which is horrifying because we're living in them constantly, and
Yeah,
we're creating in them. We're meant to be creative within them, and yeah, and it's so hard to have them reflect us and our thinking and our style or ethos or whatever. The high contrast thing, that's funny. I like that.
yeah, yeah. It looks great actually. Like you would
Yeah,
not
that's
expect that,
funny. Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
and
I
coming
love
back to
that.
like the education part, I think it also like having education focus on like teaching kids how to like use their computers and be productive with them. I feel like it's very analogous to learning to write and read. Like
Mm-hmm.
like before,
Yeah,
not everyone had access to that education, right? And to those skills. And you could see a clear difference in people who didn't, right? And I feel like it's analogous to today. Like if you're a programmer, like if you wanted to be like like take that and project it into today, and you want to write your own tools, you want to do your own things, like the number of skills that you need to do that is crazy high. Like
yeah,
it's not just programming. Like you have to learn a bunch of things to get an app launched on your
yeah,
phone. Like sure, there are tools that help you like build simple stuff, but most things are not the simple stuff, I think.
yeah,
I think most things are custom, which is
yeah.
different, right? And so, and in terms of like education, I feel like we already have the medium. Like we already have powerful computers, we already have the internet, we already have a bunch of things. We just It's just hard to get to this point of like where you or myself are at, where we can create our own things on the computer. And I also feel like jumping back to the example of my sister, it's not so much about creating the YouTube channel, but rather about having the skills to do so, and
Yeah,
the curve not being so high if it is. I mean, with YouTube, it
absolutely.
might not be the case. Like maybe not, it's not as hard.
Yeah.
But for example, just like I helped her, and like we have to download OBS, and we have to set up OBS with the right settings for like the recording, and like she doesn't have a very powerful computer, so like it's a bunch of things, and things that shouldn't be too complicated, I think.
Yeah.
And as I said, it's not necessarily about the YouTube channel, but like one thing always leads to another. Like I got into programming because I wanted to make games, and I mean, like every once in a while I jump into a game jam with my friends, and we try to make a
Yeah.
video game.
Yeah.
But that's not like what I do for a living, and that's not like my main thing where I do it. So yeah, I don't know. I just feel like it's really like closing a lot of potential for just better quality of life in general.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So like building a really complex piece of software, developing a complex piece of software should just be a more advanced version of developing a somewhat complex piece of software, right? And that's true today. Developing a somewhat complex piece of software should just be a more advanced version of developing a simple piece of software. And that's often true today, right? And developing a simple piece of software should just be a more advanced form of using software, right? And that's not at all true today, right?
Yeah.
But once we get to the right primitives, that could be the case, right?
Yeah.
Where the simple forms of using personal computing software can build to advanced forms of using personal computing software, and advanced forms and are the seed of them, right? And then advanced forms of using personal computing software should then be the seed of building simple forms of software, right? And so forth. I think that's where we should be headed with that piece.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I feel like there's some kind of gatekeeping right now. That's in. I guess it's unintentional, really. Like it's not like people don't want.
There's a lot of it. I There's certainly, you can get down to the kind of dynamics of the individual, but if you read the 1962 paper "Augmenting Human Intellect," Douglas Engelbart, who later did, like 7-8 years later, did the Mother of All Demos. One line that's kind of funny that sticks out in the middle of the page, it's somewhere in the first half of the paper. He says these. I'm paraphrasing. He says these concepts are too important to be left to market forces. And I always thought that was kind of funny. He definitely saw how computers should work, how they could work, and he also saw that left to simple market forces, that is not how they will work, and that the kind of what became the computer science community would need to kind of vigorously go after building the right concepts, and we did that in some wonderful ways, and by we I mean our forefathers. I'm taking no credit there. Obviously, our forefathers did a wonderful job with a number of different things. The internet is obviously a stellar example. It's a wonderful accident of history that the World Wide Web and email and web browsers, clients, that these things are as open as they are. A few little things going a different way, maybe they wouldn't be, right? But there are a lot of things in computing that are obviously just locked up to use. You can only use it one way. Locked up to innovation, to iteration. But yeah, Engelbart, saw that way back towards the beginning, which I always thought was kind of funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. I don't know if I wonder if it was like obvious, like if it was like an obvious
Yeah, I
thing.
wonder.
Yeah.
I bet you. I don't know. That's interesting. I wonder if it was obvious. It would be hard to know, given that he thought of it, because he also thought of a lot of things that were just so far-reaching. He could see with a much longer, a much further. He could see on a much further time horizon than many other people. So
Yeah.
and that was just another one of the things he saw, and he was right.
Yeah. Crazy. And speaking of like, that train of thought, like one of the I guess for me, like the most important thing that your work can have impact on is feeds, notifications, and like just all these
Mm,
addictive components of everything that we use today. It makes me mad because it's like I don't want to receive a bunch of notifications about stuff that I don't care about. I don't
yeah,
want
right.
to see a bunch of stuff that I don't want to see right now. Like, why don't you allow me to customize that, right?
It's pretty amazing that the front door, the very first thing that appears on your most theoretically personal device is just plastered in notifications that you have no control over. It's kind of horrifying.
Yeah,
It's really weird. So yeah, in the in an itemized personal computing future, notifications are user defined. You define, and they're technically under the hood implemented as automations, but you don't need to know that. That's another one of those primitives things, right? But the idea is that if you have an itemized and an item drive where all your items live, you could set up notifications where if a new item shows up from so and so, I want a notification of that on these devices, right? And that's just how notifications should work. There should be no. I don't want to. I can't believe I get. I mean, to like because I have to leave notifications on for some of the apps that
yeah,
I get like deliveries from, but then I get Lord knows ad after ad of
yeah, exactly.
buy one get one. I'm looking at them now, and it's pretty it's pretty horrifying. I mean, the feeds thing is interesting. I think the guy who invented infinite scrolling has since apologized. I don't know if that was. I assume it was only partially in jest. Um, and that thing that's pretty interesting. I've been playing with, and I've seen some really cool demos from other people as well. Um, Building my own infinite scrolling. I call it a prompts feed based on it's another experiment in my itemized world, but it uses items to build a prompts feed. And so and I experimented with it a little bit. I didn't love where I got with it. I need to clear my mind and go again in a few months. But the idea being that it surfaces things that I may be interested in, but that are also supportive of a healthy life, right? And so it'll surface like at the very top before you scroll. It'll hit me with weather events, that kind of thing. Google Now kind of did a similar thing way back when it got started. It was such a cool piece of software that turned into nothing after they changed it. So those kinds of things. And then if I'm curious for more, I scroll, and as I scroll, it might hit me with like, I'm trying to learn, a couple of languages, right? And so it might hit me with a flashcard, on a
Yeah,
spaced repetition,
yeah,
so that I can just get a quick, test as I'm scrolling down my prompts feed. It might hit me with an article I've marked that I want to read later, that kind of thing. And so I can scroll
yeah,
down this feed, and it'll hit me with the stuff that I've deemed as good to allow in, to my um, that world. And yeah, so the experiment, it was interesting. It was interesting. I didn't totally love where I got with it, but I need to take another stab at it.
yeah. That sounds really interesting. Like, I had not thought about, like, I thought about the you know popping up like a question about something, so like a language you're learning, but I did not, like, I had not thought about like the idea of like, oh, popping up, like, instead of just seeing new stuff, like, what about the stuff you saved for reading later?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, yeah, there's definitely a lot of potential for the feed system.
Yeah, yeah. I think we can
Yeah,
use the same mechanism,
to our
but
advantage.
yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah.
I installed a plugin in my browser to hide the YouTube feed, because
Ah,
sometimes I just
interesting.
want to
Yeah,
query stuff, right?
yeah,
Like, I know what I'm looking for. I don't want to get distracted by a bunch of
yeah.
thumbnails. So I installed that, and that's like just one of the examples as well of like how I want to interact with this type
And
of
that
tool.
problem exists in most apps. So in the app world, where each app is a silo of one type of data, which like makes no sense. That problem exists in almost every app. you open, if you want to write an email to somebody, when you open your email app and you're hit with like all these emails and new ones start coming in, and then the whole thing
Yeah.
you were thinking about's gone,
Yeah.
that seems silly. Same with notes. You got this really important thought, you need to record it, you pop up in your notes app and you're hit with all these notes, and like that makes no sense, right? And you're trying to keep onto this fragile thing that you're trying to externalize.
Yeah.
So I think that problem exists in a lot of the app silos in personal computing. That same problem, and I think that's a good example of a good example that shows we don't have the primitives figured out yet.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And like that's the same reason why I don't have like most apps that use feeds. I don't have them on my phone. Like
Smart. I like that.
because
Yeah.
because like otherwise I'm just lost. Like
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
when we were I think it was when we were in Colorado, Wyoming, when we were RVing out there, I went through and just turned off the notifications on every single app in my on my phone, except for like one or two, like phone and maybe one other. And wow, that's been a blessing.
Yeah.
That's been really nice. And I did do at some point for a few years, I just didn't have my email on my phone at all, which is a little blasphemous because at that time I was developing an email app for the iPhone. But I found that it was really good for me, especially too, because when you build the email app that you use, when you check your email, you're also thinking about all the little things about the app that you think need to be changed, which can be very unhealthy on a weekend.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
That
yeah,
makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. Speaking of learning languages, one of the languages that I'm trying to learn is Spanish. Are there good one of the ways that I most want to dig into, um, uh, uh, getting a little bit closer to fluency in the languages I'm learning is engaging, or at least starting with reading on in forums, blogs, whatever, on the topics that I'm already like researching all the time, right? So like I'm
Yeah.
already constantly reading stuff on the future of computing and that kind of thing. Are there any good Spanish language forums, blogs, that kind of thing on the kinds of things
Yeah.
that we like to think about?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Okay,
I've found more things in French, I think.
interesting.
That
That's another one that I've been picking up. Uh, uh, do you know any off the names off the top of your head?
so not the names, but I remember uh,
I
there's
can
an
email you
operating
the links. Okay.
yeah, okay. There's an operating system that's called Collapse OS.
Okay.
And the author, he's from Quebec, and I think he mentions a few sources in
Interesting. Okay.
French. Yeah, and I clicked at those, and they seemed very interesting because they talked about not computing specifically, but um, I think that because Collapse OS is an operating system designed to be um, to survive like a collapse of the world,
Ooh, interesting. Okay.
right? So it's super portable, and
Mm,
it you can like if you're lost in the like an apocalyptic world and you like
mm,
find an old thing that you can program, like you could install it there and like do your thing. So it's kind
yeah.
of like around that idea.
Yeah.
So it's on I guess
Interesting.
it's on those subjects, right?
Yeah.
And related to like collapse theories about the world and stuff like that.
Interesting. Okay.
Uh,
I'll have to check that out. That's awesome.
yeah, and on Spanish, I'm not sure because I don't. I can't think of anything that I consume in Spanish right now related to
Okay.
these
Yeah.
topics. Um, I don't know what other topics there might be though.
Yeah.
If anything comes to
Okay.
mind, I'm gonna tell you.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Because I'm
But
trying
yeah,
to figure out how to increase the hours of my day that I spend,
yeah,
in other languages. But in order to do that, it needs to start overlapping with other stuff.
yeah.
So I've
Exactly.
been trying to find forums and blogs in other languages that talk about these kinds of things that we like to think about.
Yeah, same happens to me. I'm trying to learn French. My girlfriend's from France, and so I don't like French. Like I don't like French the language. I like,
Okay.
which is funny, right? But I definitely want to learn it, and
Yeah.
I spent some time in France. Like I spent 2 months there, and that helped me improve my French a
Yeah.
lot. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not advanced by any means, but it definitely improved a lot. And well, yeah, I've sometimes I also look for content like that, and yeah, I know what you mean. Like it's hard to find something like it's hard to find content that you like independently of the language on a different language. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. There should be a directory for that.
directory. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it would be helpful. That's interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, French is the one that I'm furthest on. I'll check out Collapse OS. That's interesting.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's been 2 hours, so I don't know how you're doing on time. I don't have anything next, so I could keep talking. But if you would like to drop out and do something else,
yeah, I would love if I could ask one question. I'd love to know what's your background that brought your interest into these kinds of topics.
Well, there's
not
a
background
simple.
So much, you get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when I was a kid, when I was like 8 years old or so, I would play that I would make my own computers. Like I would, because I just loved computers. Like there's pictures of me like being like 4 years old, like using a computer. I like wearing diapers and stuff. And I like to make my own laptops. Like I would take like pieces of cardboard and use tape to make it fold.
Nice. Yeah.
And I would draw the keyboard and I would draw the operating system. And I would always draw Mac OS because as a kid I saw that and I'm like, that's just like way cooler. Like
yeah.
And so I would do that, and I would do the same with like phones. Like I mean, back then actually there were no touch screen phones like or tablets. Like that didn't exist. But I just felt like that made sense. Like why is there not a screen that you can touch on it? And so I would play with my friends and cousins like that. I would make those and I would sell them to them and stuff.
Nice.
Like for like like whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm really close to like computers in that sense. Like I really enjoy using them and I building things with them, or just like building them as well. So that's definitely the main point. And at some point later on, when I was like in middle school, I remember thinking that like how does one make an operating system? Like that question popped out, and so I just Googled it. The same way, like I learned to make websites because I Googled it, right? Like how to make a website. And so I'm like, like that should work as well. Like I'm going to look for that. And I found out about Linux, which led into a rabbit hole of like customizing Linux. But back then I didn't know exactly, how it worked or anything like that. And I broke a few computers by trying to install them and stuff.
Yeah.
I remember getting into OpenSUSE Studio, which is a web app that basically allows you to select like the packages that you want on your distro, and it allows you to customize your like your login screen and like quite a few things. Yeah. And for me, that was like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to put my logo, like like I wanted to put with my logo. So
yeah.
So yeah, that definitely got me started with this.
Yeah.
And like ever since, I just really enjoy it. Like it's just fun. Like I can literally I can spend hours and hours and hours just customizing Linux. Although I don't do that anymore because it's actually not healthy for me to like stare at a command line, like just waiting for packages to install. And like
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
Um,
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. I went through a lot of the same motions. That's fun.
yeah. So because you went to school to study computers, I
I
mean to
did.
study computer science.
Yeah, I learned as a teen. It's the same time, I started by trying to figure out. Of course, this was pre-Google, but like I'd go to the library and find a book to learn how to build a web page, right? Um, and yeah, so that's how I got started. And I think I first learned how to program in Quick Basic, um, but and I spent my teen years, like I think you said you did, freelancing. Um, and yeah, and then I started computer science in school. Yeah,
Nice,
yeah. And I was
nice.
lucky
Yeah,
too. My high school had a really good computer science program, which was odd, but wonderful.
nice. Yeah, that's really awesome. Like having access to computers as a kid is definitely it's definitely a privilege, but it's also like
Yeah,
a blessing. It's like so cool, such a cool
yeah,
opportunity.
yeah. It really
Yeah,
is. It really is.
yeah. So yeah, I don't know how you're doing in terms of time because I'm the type of person that like can't just like keep talking.
Oh yeah,
So let me
I
know like
yeah. I probably have to go in maybe 5 or 10 minutes.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so let me actually yeah, it's a good time because I just heard the uh, I think yeah I think my AirPods discharged.
Oh,
Oh, just this one. Okay, so
good.
yeah, I also have like 1 minute left.
Okay.
Yeah, there might be some questions that I forgot to ask, but I guess that'll be for another time or something.
Yeah, yeah, no, and this has been great. Thanks for having me. I hope you keep in touch. I'm curious about the things that you're thinking about too, and curious to follow along.
Thanks. Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. And I was just looking forward for this call. Like ever since I found your work, I'm like,
Hmm.
that makes like that's exactly what we need. Like it's just like
Hmm.
it was obvious. I'm like, yeah, and it was actually Nick Reese. I
Uh
know you
huh.
know him because I
Yeah.
work with him, and he told me.
Oh, no
And
kidding. Okay.
yeah, so
Yeah, he's awesome. Yeah.
yeah, he's great. Yeah, I
Yeah.
also interviewed him for my podcast, but I haven't finished editing that
Oh,
episode. So
interesting.
yeah,
Cool. I look forward to
yeah.
that. I'll watch out for that episode.
I have to say that I was very dispersed, so it's not
Hmm.
it's not the best
Yeah.
episode. I mean, he did
Yeah.
great, but I was very lost.
Yeah.
But yeah, in
No
any
worries.
case,
I'm excited to check it out.
yeah, cool. Well, yeah, it's definitely a pleasure, and we'll definitely keep in touch. And
Likewise, yeah, yeah. Please keep in touch. Yeah, thank you for having me on, and it's great to meet you. Thanks for reaching out.
yeah, thank you so much.